All right, welcome back live at Drew's house, another edition. Hope everybody is doing well out there as we work our way through more than halfway through April now. My goodness, where is the time going? Even in a pandemic, time flies. That's what I find anyway. Hope everybody's staying healthy out there and all that good stuff. Return guest to the show today. I am very excited about this. Tanisha Sullivan is joining us, president of the NAACP Boston. She was great last time we talked. Which off the air we were just talking was probably getting close to a year ago. How you been, Tanisha? Thanks for joining us again.
It's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation, and it has been feels like a very long year. I'm sure for many of us, but feel very blessed to be here. So.
Obviously, we tend to have you on when there's, it seems like there's always tough issues in the world. And here we go again. Let's start with this Daunte Wright situation in Minneapolis, because obviously just horrible. Another person loses their life. And the first thing I thought of, Tanisha, when I saw this was you, and your big point last time we talked was we like police, but there needs to be better police training, police reform. And as soon as I heard them say that this was an accidental discharge, I pretty much saw that face you're giving me right now.
Yeah. Look, I think last year we saw, very good positive momentum across the country around policing reform, and specifically reforms that were designed to bring about greater transparency and accountability. And here in Massachusetts, we were very pleased that we were able to get policing reform across the finish line that brings about greater accountability, and really will take a deeper look at our training protocols here in the Commonwealth. And so we certainly saw momentum last year, coming on the heels of the horrific tragedies with the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. The tragic killing of Daunte Wright reminds us of is that there is still so much work that we need to do. We can't let our foot off the gas on this one. We have to get to the point where, where we understand that the killing of an unarmed person, an unarmed Black man, at some point it's not accidental. Like, there's something fundamentally wrong in our system that we keep seeing these types of tragedies. And, whether it's, someone fears for their life, or it's accidental, or, or any other excuse. It is, I do believe, a high honor to serve in law enforcement, to be entrusted with the care and the protection of communities. And that honor and really the privilege and the trust that we place in individuals has to be met with greater accountability. And so I remain hopeful that we will get there, but I have to say, beyond troubled, I'm angry that we're still having this conversation. Yet another family that is devastated, and another city that is being, has a spotlight on it. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about Massachusetts as we go as well, because like you said, there was some progress seen over the last year, but just keeping with this case for one moment too. And I know you've heard this before, so I know I'm not catching you off guard with anything, but I work in a newsroom in Boston, and we get calls that are sometimes people that aren't fans of the news we're reporting on. And sometimes they're off the grid, sometimes they're not, whatever. But in a lot of these cases, and this one included, we're getting a lot of calls about tragedy. Yes, why is this person driving away from police though, struggling from police? And it seems like that tends to be, people are always looking for that. What did the person that got shot what did that person do wrong? We're just curious, what is your response when you hear that? It's, yeah, sure, the police officer fired a weapon, but what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear that?
The first thing that comes to mind is that we have within our society a deep respect for law enforcement, right? Like we want to believe that law enforcement is good, and that there are good people wearing the uniform and good people who are trying to keep us safe. And so you're right, we oftentimes hear, but why did the victim do X, Y, and Z? And again, that's, to me, immediately that speaks to, again, our belief system as a society that law enforcement is good. And I think we have to get to the point where we value human life. Right. And we don't just say that, but like we actually mean it. And if and when we get to that point, the question won't be why did the victim do this, that led to a member of law enforcement killing them. The questions will be different. It will be, why did this happen, period. Right? Why did this happen, period, allows for us to really explore, some of the things that I talked about before. Is this a training issue? Is this a racism issue, right? Because we are also seeing, heightened, increased displays of and acts of racism across our country. Is this an issue where or is this truly, accidental? So I think it's why we got to get to the point where it's why did this happen, not why did the victim behave in this way that then caused law enforcement to react the way they did. It's humanity.
And I'm trying to think too of, this is another, it seems, unfortunately, there's so many stories that we have to talk about, but there's a story in Virginia too, where this man who is currently serving our country, an Army Ranger, and he gets, pulled over and pepper sprayed. And when I was thinking about these phone calls that, we do get, I'm thinking about immediately what he said. Why did you drive away? And he said, because I wanted to get to a well-lit place. Right. And so that if anything happened, those are the thoughts that certain people think about when they, I can't, maybe I don't necessarily think of those things, but as somebody who's maybe seen a lot more stuff than I have in his life, how can I put myself in his shoes? I think that really struck with me when he said I was trying to drive to a well-lit spot, so because I didn't want anything back.
Absolutely. Look, the Army Second Lieutenant Karan Nazario, his story really struck a chord struck a chord with many of us. But, over the weekend, I was reflecting more deeply on his story, and it really speaks to, truly, just abuse of power in ways that, I think most of us hope, don't exist. But his story really does speak to the fact that this type of abuse of power is alive and is strong and is well, unfortunately. When I read the piece about him saying that he was driving to a well-lit place, I was like, yeah, of course. I would too, as a Black person, as a woman, if I'm, depending upon the circumstances, yes, I'm going to look for a space where I'm not going to be isolated and alone. And so that story and that reaction is not uncommon for people who, live lives that are unfortunately vulnerable under certain circumstances in this country. I think, when we see Second Lieutenant Nazario in uniform, Drew, in uniform, we see this man and just the blatant disrespect for him as a human being, him as a Black man, him as a member of our military. If there's any group of people who should be honored and revered in our community and have the utmost of all of our collective respect, it's members of our military who are, putting their lives on the line in ways that many of us, see as unimaginable. And yet he, really the true picture of what it means to be an American, wearing that uniform, still stripped of his dignity, still told, that he should not repeat what happened, or it was going to bring more trouble to him. I understand that one of the officers has been terminated. I think, hopefully there will be a full investigation down there, because that type of brazen behavior, I think, can speak to culture. So there may be a much deeper issue there in Windsor, in Windsor, Virginia, than this one isolated incident, unfortunately.
And let's talk about that a little bit too, because I will tell you, the last time I had you on, and I know several police officers, and we're, friends on Facebook and all that. And a lot of them watched our interview, and so many of them said, and I think so much of that is all true. And they came out against it was George Floyd we were talking about a lot that time. And of course and they said, of course, that officer is terrible. He does a disservice to the industry, and he should go to jail for the rest of his life or whatever. And so many of those police officers are there saying, but in Massachusetts, I will tell you, it's not, some of these things are location wise. And here in Massachusetts, I think we're greatly good. That was a lot of what I was hearing. I don't think you can probably say there's probably not 100% great cops all over Massachusetts, but what is your kind of grade of policing in Massachusetts as we speak? When you look around, is it better than the rest of the country, or do we still have those deep-rooted issues here?
Look, I think regardless of where you are in the country, this time in our collective history calls for really an honest review and reflection on what law enforcement is today and what it should be to meet our needs. And to your point, so often people say, oh, that's happening over there. That's not happening here. Oh, my Boston accent really just came out right then. That it's happening someplace else, and it's not something that we need to be concerned about. But, there are examples here of, members of law enforcement who are not honoring, quite frankly, the uniform they're wearing. And so we're not immune to it. And quite frankly, it should not take the killing of someone, an unarmed individual, for us to say, oh, well, maybe we should do something. So I am hopeful that, when we talk about the reforms in Massachusetts, the governor signed the reforms into law. Now we've actually got to implement those, right? And so I am looking very closely, monitoring very closely our progress on implementation, so that, we are not simply avoiding tragedy, but that we can actually serve as an exemplar, as a model for what good policing can look like, what good public safety can look like when it values all human life.
And so many of those reforms were maybe not a direct result, but certainly jumped on the momentum of the protests last summer, people taking to the streets, and a lot of that stuff got done. I mean, that is what protests do. I mean, that is protests in action.
Absolutely. I say it's protest to policy to practice. Okay, protest to policy to practice. And so surely we have to acknowledge the role of protest and the important role of protest in moving this work forward, and really helping to drive good, progressive policy making that can lead to what's happening in practice. So absolutely.
I like that. I don't think I'll ever forget that now. That's good. Yeah, I wonder though, as we look back and we think back to those protests in Boston, which I think were, you might get some arguments, but I think when you talk about all those people, largely peaceful. I mean, for those to happen, I mean, it was I think I know I was at a few of them and working some of them, and I couldn't believe how smoothly some of them ran and well organized and all that. I do wonder, you look at the George Floyd case, the Derek Chauvin case going on right now in Minneapolis, and a lot of people out there looking for justice for George Floyd. When you see all those people starting to take to the streets of Minneapolis with a trial going on, is your immediate thought, excellent, more voices heard, or a little bit scared what could happen?
Look, I believe that protest is part of our DNA here, in the United States. It is, when we stop protesting, I think we're losing sight of who we are and what we can and should be. So I am encouraged by protest. I'm encouraged by people finding ways to make their voices heard, to bring about a better community, right? You mentioned the trial of Derek Chauvin. I am also mindful that we are, the trial the prosecution has been making its case for the past week or so. And we're now starting to turn the corner where the defense gets to put on its defense, right? And so I'm mindful that I think emotionally jarring as the prosecution's case was, listening to so many of the witnesses who firsthand, were trying so desperately to help this man. And were unable to, and you hear kind of the pain in their voices, in their testimony, right? I am mindful that as the defense puts on its case, I'm expecting that it will be also, an emotional experience, because we're going to hear from the defense, excuses, or a defense, depending upon how your lens of why it was appropriate, why Derek Chauvin believed that it was appropriate for him to behave in the way that he did and to take George Floyd's life in the way that he did. And I think, we've got to prepare ourselves as a community, as a society, as a country, to hear that side of it, because it's going to be painful. I think for any of us who witnessed the video back in May or June, and we were struck by how just cold and callous Derek Chauvin looked in that video as he was kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, I think it is going to be hard for us to hear his defense. And we have to fortify ourselves for that, and prepare ourselves for the next few days. I am hopeful that this jury will render justice in Minneapolis, and that justice will not only be for the family of George Floyd, but it will be for all of us. All of us who, whether we were on the street filming and we saw it firsthand, or we, saw the video streaming on the news or what have you, we've all been traumatized by that. And so I do hope that this jury will render justice for all of us, and that it will bring forth a verdict that holds Derek Chauvin accountable for his actions, and that it sends a message to others.
Again, Tanisha Sullivan joining us, NAACP President, Boston. When I asked you about closer to home here, and we talked about some of the local policing, it struck me that I feel like you answered it in a very nice way, but part of you wanted to say, if you think that can't happen here, you're out of your mind. And I can imagine that's what a lot of people feel like when they hear police officers say things like, that's there, and pointing the finger at other states, other communities, other regions. Obviously, there's been bad policing here as well. We've seen that. It doesn't always lead to death, but sometimes it can. And I just wonder, what would your message be to the police officers that have to look to their other brothers and sisters on the force, and maybe say, you know what, if something bad is going on, even if it's not something that's going to make the front page news, if you see something bad within the force, say something. What would be the message in that regard?
I mean, this is what we teach our children. Right? I mean, this is like basic preschool, kindergarten learning here in some respects. It's speak up and, and don't allow other people to do bad things in your presence. Speak up. It's like that simple to me. But I'm also mindful, I've been around long enough to know that, there's a culture at play here, and culture is a beast, and a difficult one to tackle. And I'm mindful that the culture is one within law enforcement that oftentimes does not encourage folks to speak up. And I think, at some point, the law enforcement community has to decide what it wants to be. And it has to decide that it wants to embrace a culture of transparency, a culture of trust, a culture of accountability. Law enforcement has to embrace a culture that says, we are here truly as public servants, right? To protect and serve the public. And so if there's someone who is intentionally stepping out of line, they not only need to be called out, they need to be removed. And if there are others who are crossing the line and they don't realize it, it truly is, a misjudgment, depending upon how severe it is, the culture has to be one that allows for rehabilitation as well. But ultimately, it is going to be either law enforcement is going to decide for itself that it wants to dismantle this culture that exists that says, you don't speak out or speak against. Or I do believe we are moving toward the point where society, where our community as a whole, whether it's, our neighbors or it's our elected officials or it's our business community, is going to say itself, enough is enough. And then law enforcement will find itself in a situation where the reforms are placed upon it rather than them being part of the process to bring about the reform. One way or another, Drew.
And I know you'll be watching and holding people accountable for that. Our final couple of moments here, I just want to ask, what has the last year been like for you? Never mind in a pandemic that will be the story of our time as far as the health. Well, hopefully it's the only pandemic we ever go through. But to have the protests of last summer, how has the last year been for you when you look back on it, and what do you envision for the months ahead?
The last year has been trying. It really has. I'm like, when did I sleep is how I feel, It just feels like, we were just in a constant state of movement and having to address issues, right? But I'm also encouraged by what I saw last year. I'm encouraged by, more people, having a desire to deepen their understanding about race and racism, and more people coming to understand why it is that so many of us have been, fighting for greater equality, racial equality. For as devastating as the COVID-19 public health crisis has been for us, the disparities that it illuminated, both from a health standpoint and an economic standpoint and an education standpoint, actually, right? I think it has served to elevate issues in a way that requires action on the part of policymakers and other leaders. That's a good thing. And likewise with the racial awakening that happened really around the globe as a result of the devastating murders last year of innocent Black people, there too, people just have a heightened awareness. And what I have seen is a deeper desire in a broader group of people who have the desire to effectuate change. So I'm hopeful that as we move through 2021, that we will not forget the lessons of 2020. and that we will double down and be more intentional about driving public policy solutions to dismantle systemic racism. Because at the heart of much of what we learned last year, health, economic, education, policing, at the heart of it really is the roots of systemic racism. And it's going to take all of us to really tackle those roots. And it's going to take all of us to remain committed to I believe it is a long road ahead, the long road ahead to truly bring about racial equality.
You're right. And I think I notice a lot more young people getting involved too, which I think is great. I have younger cousins in their 20s that are having conversations at their dinner tables with their parents, and even younger than that. I see young people asking mom and dad, what is going on here? There's something not right. I see it. And I that has to be good. Can I ask one other question? I kind of lied.
Yeah.
We're not completely done. Sorry, because there's one thing that keeps coming up, and I see them I'm coming to you from Danvers. Show is out of Newburyport, both north of Boston. I see some even in my town, even in my neighborhood. I've seen a lot of people, and this probably brings our conversation full circle, but the Blue Lives Matter flag that is flying around, and it seems to be, we support police, right? That's essentially what the meaning is these days. And I just wonder, what has that symbol become in 2021? Because I know a lot of people look at it now and say, well, I'm not sure I do support that, where maybe I didn't know enough about it 5 years ago. What is it?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that we've gotten to the point where it's either you support Black lives or you support law enforcement. Like, where did that come from?
It does seem like the two are pitted against each other, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's so crazy to me. And, and because it's not true, right? Like, you can do both. Like, it's not zero sum, it's not either or. And unfortunately, I do think, as, 2020 moved along, that as people saw the Blue Lives Matter flags, or I should say the thin blue line flag,
yeah.
Right, that for some people, it started to take on or emote, they started to feel similar feelings they feel when they see like a Confederate flag. Right? And I think, that's dangerous for us as a community. We I believe in this, I call it my philosophy is I believe in radical love. People always say, your thinking is radical. You've got these, that's what they say, this radical thinking. And I say, well, if I'm radical, I believe in radical love. Right. And so this idea that we choose, again, kind of Black lives or blue lives, like that to me doesn't speak to love. It doesn't speak to humanity. It doesn't speak to an understanding that, blue is the uniform. There's a person in that uniform, right? And there's a person, who chances are actually is doing the job they're doing because they care about their communities, right? And it doesn't take into consideration that when we talk about Black lives, we're talking about a human being. We're talking about human beings who have, for not just generations, but for centuries, been dehumanized, systematically dehumanized in this country. And so if anything, we should be, really trying to bring us all together, and really, working to, I would say, reject these ideas that you've got to either you support Black lives or you support the thin blue line. It's not an either or. It's not an either or, and it shouldn't be that way.
Well said. And I will end on this note here, something that's a little bit different. I usually don't really talk politics with you, or I mean, I guess this all kind of greatly falls under some of those spectrums anyway. But you are in a city, Boston, that now has a glass ceiling in a lot of ways being broken with acting Mayor Kim Janey. Just what is your thought when you see that in the city of Boston? Must be a pretty proud moment.
Yeah, it is certainly a historic moment. I have to be, Frank Drew. I am mindful that, Kim Janey has ascended to the corner office in City Hall by virtue of her position, right? Because Marty Walsh is now Secretary of Labor. I'm mindful of that, and I am absolutely I celebrate the historic nature of her being there, a woman, and being a Black woman at that. At the same time, I'm waiting to see what the city of Boston is going to do. And what I mean by that is, we have talked about wanting to, that we need to elect a woman and we need to elect a person of color, and that that now is the time, and it really would speak to our progress as a city. And that remains true. I am waiting to see what our city is going to do when it comes time for the residents of Boston to cast their ballot. Will the outcome say that our city is ready for a woman, and or will the outcome of the ballot being cast say that our city is ready for a person of color? There's still a question mark there, and so I'm watching this race very closely. We have a field that is shaping up very nicely. I think we've got a number of individuals who have diverse backgrounds and are qualified and have different diversity of experience. And so the question for us is going to be, who do we want at the helm as we move into really the next chapter of the city of Boston post-pandemic? Who do we believe is best suited, best positioned, has the leadership and the vision necessary to lead us all, hopefully to a more prosperous Boston, on the other side of this pandemic. So I'm watching it closely. I'm very excited for Kim Janey. She's a dear friend. And from a political standpoint, as someone who is a close observer, I actually can't wait for this campaign season to really heat up.
Never a dull moment. Tanisha Sullivan, welcome. Thank you very much for coming back into my kitchen here, which is in a pandemic where we always do this show from now, it seems. I always enjoy it. I always learn a lot, and it always spurs a lot of conversations at, like I said, at the dinner table, and you know how that goes. It's constantly evolving. So, but like I said, you opened up a lot of good conversations last time, and I always appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for doing it. Again, I know you're busy.
No, thank you for having me. Have a good one.
We'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.
All right, Tanisha Sullivan, the president of the NAACP in Boston. Always great to talk with her. Like I said, we always learn a lot, and obviously a lot going on in the world. Unfortunately, not a lot of it is good stuff. Certainly in Minneapolis with not only the trial, but another shooting death involving a police officer. But a lot of greater issues we talked about there. I guess not greater, but bigger picture issues as far as moving forward in the future and all that stuff. Tanisha Sullivan, president of the NAACP. Hope you all enjoyed that. Hope you all enjoyed this week's show. We had some good. We had the kids on Tuesday. That was fun. The Newburyport athletes there. Interesting look at school in a pandemic and all that. And man, what a tough year it's been on the seniors. But I hope you enjoyed hearing from Tanisha Sullivan as well. I'm going to end it there for the week. I kept that, went a little longer than I usually do. So I'll get out of the way. And my dog is like staring at me. It's very funny. He's got a cone on too. My buddy Mookie, he's got a little scratch or growth on his head and keeps scratching at it. So he's got the cone of shame on. And I'm going to go spend some time with the dogs. All right. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.